In the unforgiving Wyoming territory of 1879, where justice hung by threads thin as noose rope, Sarah Freeman used healing hands to carve out existence for her fatherless children. The widowed black mother faced losing everything when Judge Clayton's corrupt tax scheme targeted her small homestead, until fate delivered a bullet-riddled white stranger to her doorstep, a dying cattle baron whose empire was worth more than the entire county. Sarah didn't know it yet, but saving this rich cowboy would ignite a war that would either destroy her family or deliver the justice they'd been denied their entire lives. Flames licked the mansion walls. Sarah Freeman's heart hammered against her ribs as she herded her children through the narrow passage. Smoke clawed at their lungs. Behind them, footsteps pounded on hardwood. Marcus stumbled, crimson blooming across his sleeve. A bullet had found him. "Keep moving!" Sarah hissed, pressing her palm against his wound. James Hollister limped behind them, silver revolver steady despite his injuries. His face was a mask of grim determination, the same face that had been unconscious on her kitchen table 3 months prior. "Give us the deed, woman," a voice bellowed from the smoke. Judge Clayton. "Or watch your children burn." Sarah clutched the document in her trembling fingers. Half of the Hollister empire signed over to her name. Freedom, security, justice. Marcus stared at her with pain-glazed eyes. Ella clutched little James Jr. to her chest. Hollister's hand found her shoulder. He whispered something that vanished in the roar of the fire. Sarah struck a match against the wall. The deed ignited, brilliant orange consuming the paper. She pushed her children toward the hidden exit while the flames distracted their pursuers. Locking eyes with Clayton through the smoke, Sarah Freeman stood tall. "You'll never own what was never yours to take." 3 months earlier. The sun beat down on Salvation Creek's dusty main street. Sarah Freeman kept her eyes forward, ignoring the sideways glances from townsfolk. Her basket was heavy with herbs and supplies from the general store where Mr. Patterson had charged her double again. "Mama, look." 8-year-old James Jr. pointed at a poster announcing the railroad's arrival, the very railroad that would cut through their small plot of land. "Keep walking," Sarah said, tightening her grip on his small hand. Home was a modest cabin on 2 acres outside town. Not much, but it was theirs. Her late husband had saved for years during his time with the Buffalo Soldiers, paid in full with both money and blood. 16-year-old Marcus met them at the gate, face tight with worry. He thrust a paper into Sarah's hands. "Tax notice," he muttered. 2 weeks. Sarah's stomach dropped as she read. Judge Clayton claimed they owed back taxes she had faithfully paid. "Ella, take your brother inside." 12-year-old Ella, already wise beyond her years, nodded and led James Jr. away. The girl had her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. "They want our land for the railroad," Marcus said, voice low and fierce. "Everyone knows it." Sarah folded the notice carefully. "Then they'll have to take it from us." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat on the porch steps. The notice lay on her lap, moonlight illuminating the official stamp. 2 weeks to prove she'd paid. Her receipts were tucked safely in her husband's old army chest, but they'd done little good in past disputes. A black woman's word against a white judge's claim. The story never changed. Dawn came with rain. Sarah sent the children to gather herbs while she prepared medicines for Mrs. Johnson's difficult pregnancy. Her hands worked from memory, crushing roots and mixing tinctures. A commotion outside broke her concentration. Marcus burst through the door, shirt soaked with blood not his own. "Mama, we found a man." They carried him in on Sarah's old quilt. White man, mid-40s, expensive clothes now torn and dirt-stained. Gunshot wound to his side. "He was by the creek," Ella explained, eyes wide. "Nearly dead." "Should have left him," Marcus muttered. "No white man would help us." Sarah examined the wound. Clean through, but infection had set in. "We don't choose who deserves mercy," she said, though a voice in her mind agreed with her son. The stranger's face was familiar. She'd seen it in newspaper clippings. James Hollister, cattle baron, owner of half the territory, owner of the railroad threatening her land. "Get my kit," Sarah ordered, "and heat water." The bullet came out easier than expected. Sarah cleaned the wound with whiskey, then applied a poultice of herbs and honey. The man didn't wake, but his breathing steadied. "What do we do with him?" Marcus asked that night as they ate a thin stew. "We wait," Sarah answered, "and watch." Sheriff Wilson arrived the next morning, his horse kicking up dust. Sarah met him on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Heard you're good with sickness," the sheriff said, not dismounting. "Anyone come by needing help? Stranger, maybe?" Sarah's face revealed nothing. "No strangers here, Sheriff." Inside, young James Jr. silently tucked Hollister's silver pocket watch under a floorboard. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Judge Clayton's mighty concerned about missing persons in the county. "I'll pray he finds whoever he's looking for," Sarah replied. 3 days passed before Hollister opened his eyes. Sarah was changing his bandages when he grabbed her wrist, grip surprisingly strong for a man near death. "Where?" His voice was sandpaper rough. "My home. My children found you." Recognition flickered in his fever-bright eyes. "Freeman." Sarah pulled her wrist free. "You know my name." "Everyone knows the widow healer." He tried to sit up, wincing. "Lie back or tear your stitches," she ordered. "I didn't waste good thread just for you to bleed out on my bed." Hollister studied her face. Something like respect crossed his features. When night fell and the children slept, Sarah brought him broth. She closed the bedroom door before speaking. "I know who you are, Mr. Hollister. Know you own the railroad coming through my land." He didn't deny it. "I saved your life," she continued, voice steady. "But don't think that means I trust you." Hollister regarded her silently, then nodded. "Seems we have much to discuss, Mrs. Freeman." Outside, a rider watched the cabin from the tree line. He'd found what Judge Clayton was looking for. Hollister watched from the window as Sarah hung laundry. Her movements were efficient, each motion serving purpose. No waste, nothing extravagant. A woman who had learned to live with less and expect nothing. 5 days had passed since he'd regained consciousness. The fever had broken, but weakness still claimed his limbs. His side ached with each breath. Sarah's children moved around him like wary animals circling a strange dog. The older boy, Marcus, brought water without meeting his eyes. The girl, Ella, changed bandages with clinical precision. Only the youngest, James Jr., showed curiosity, sneaking glances when he thought Hollister wasn't looking. "Your wound is healing well," Sarah said that evening, examining the puckered flesh at his side. Her fingers were cool against his skin. "Another week before you should travel." "Your hospitality is appreciated," Hollister replied. Sarah's lips tightened. Necessity, not hospitality. A kettle whistled on the stove. Outside, wind stirred dust in small cyclones. The cabin creaked like an old man settling his bones. That night, Hollister overheard Sarah telling her children stories before bed. Tales of Philadelphia, where she'd been born free. Of the white employer's daughter who taught her to read in secret. Of meeting their father, a proud Buffalo soldier who dreamed of land to call their own. Land that was now in jeopardy. Morning brought Marcus to Hollister's door with a ledger book. The boy stood awkwardly, shoulders squared against anticipated rejection. "Mother says you know business," Marcus said, words clipped. "Says I should learn from whoever's willing to teach." Hollister motioned him closer. "Bring that here." They bent over the book together. Hollister explaining principles of accounting, profit margins, investment strategies. The boy absorbed everything like parched earth drinks rain. "You have a mind for numbers," Hollister observed. Marcus closed the book. "No use for it here." "There's use for it everywhere." Later, Sarah found them still talking. Her expression shifted between gratitude and suspicion. She stood in the doorway, watching her son's animated face as he described a theoretical business venture. That night, after the children slept, Sarah brought Hollister tea. Her movements were guarded, but curiosity simmered beneath. "Why are you helping my son?" Hollister sipped the bitter liquid. "Talent deserves nurturing, regardless of circumstances." "Circumstances," Sarah repeated, the word sharp as flint. "You mean his skin." Hollister met her gaze. "I mean everything that would stand in his way." In town, Judge Clayton paced his office. The chandelier cast spiderweb shadows across a map of the county. Red marks indicated properties acquired along the railroad route. A significant hole remained where the Freeman property should be. "Hollister still hasn't been found," Sheriff Wilson reported, hat in hand. "But there's talk the widow Freeman has a patient." Clayton's fingers traced the empty space on the map. "Increase patrols near her property. If it's him, I want to know." 3 more days passed. Hollister grew stronger. He taught Marcus in the mornings. In afternoons, young James Jr. showed him hiding spots around the property, proud as any explorer showing uncharted lands. "My pa built this place," the boy said, revealing a hollow beneath the porch steps, "for keeping important things." In evenings, Ella sat with Hollister while Sarah prepared supper. The girl had her mother's hands and her father's quiet intensity. She helped change bandages, asking questions about cattle business, railroad investments, banking. "You ask the questions of someone twice your age," Hollister remarked. "Knowledge is never wasted," she replied, echoing words clearly learned from her mother. Sarah watched these growing connections with wary eyes. Her children were warming to the stranger. A dangerous thing to hope. The confrontation came on a Tuesday. Marcus returned from town with a split lip and bruised ribs. Sarah cleaned his wounds in silence, her back rigid with controlled fury. "Sheriff's son called me boy," Marcus explained, voice flat. "Said we'd be gone soon anyway when they take our land." Hollister stood in the doorway, steady enough now to move unassisted. "You've got to learn to defend yourself." Sarah's head snapped up. He defended himself by walking away. "And came home bleeding for it. Better bleeding than hanging." Sarah's voice cut like steel. "In this world, a black boy who fights back ends up swinging from a tree." Silence filled the cabin. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. That night, Hollister found Marcus behind the barn, striking a wooden post with barely controlled rage. "Your mother's not wrong," Hollister said, "but neither am I." He positioned Marcus's hands, adjusted his stance. "It's not about fighting. It's about standing your ground." For an hour, he taught the boy control, precision, when to yield and when to hold firm. Sarah watched from the darkness, arms crossed over her chest. The next morning, Sarah found Hollister on the porch. Dawn painted the sky copper and rose. The temperature hung between night's chill and day's promise. "Why are you still here?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You're well enough to travel." "Perhaps I enjoy the company?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You own half this territory, including the railroad threatening my land. What game are you playing, Mr. Hollister?" "No game." He looked toward the horizon. "Just finding my bearings." He told her of his own humble beginnings. Son of a poor rancher, climbing through grit and sometimes brutal choices, of regrets that money couldn't wash away, of a growing sense that empire building had cost him something essential. "And what would you build instead?" Sarah asked, her voice softening despite herself. "What would you—" Her answer came without hesitation. "A school, where all children learn, regardless of color or circumstance." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared vision beneath different skins. That night, Hollister discovered papers in his saddlebag revealing his business partner's involvement with Clayton's land seizure scheme. Men he'd trusted, conspiring behind his back. He faced a choice: quietly reclaim his assets by exposing only Clayton or bring down the entire corrupt system, including friends who'd betrayed him. By midnight, Hollister had made his decision. He packed his few belongings by moonlight, planning to confront his partners directly. Better to handle this away from the Freemans. His presence endangered them enough already. Sarah found him at the door, rifle across his chest. "Leaving without goodbye," she said, voice flat. "Safer for everyone." Empty promises. Her words were soft but cut deep, no different than the others. Before Hollister could respond, hoofbeats approached. Multiple riders. His expression hardened. "They've found me." He pressed his silver pocket watch into Sarah's palm, closing her fingers around it. "This proves everything. If I don't return, find Attorney Hammond in Cheyenne." Hollister stepped onto the porch, hands raised as riders surrounded the cabin. Sheriff Wilson at the lead. "Mr. Hollister," the sheriff called. "Judge Clayton requests your presence." Hollister nodded toward Sarah. This family had no choice but to help an injured man. They bear no responsibility. As they led him away, Hollister turned to Marcus standing in the doorway. Sometimes a man's worth isn't in what he builds, but in what he leaves behind. The horses disappeared into darkness, leaving Sarah clutching the silver watch, its metal warm against her skin. Morning light revealed dust settling where the riders had been. The Freeman cabin stood quiet in their wake. Inside, Sarah turned the silver pocket watch over in her hands. Its weight was substantial, like the burden of decision now pressing on her shoulders. Marcus watched from the doorway, jaw clenched. "We have to help him." Sarah's thumb found a small catch on the watch's side. It clicked open, revealing not hours and minutes but a hidden compartment. Inside lay folded documents, creased from frequent handling. Ella peered over her mother's shoulder as Sarah unfolded the papers. Banking records, property deeds, tax receipts, including her own, the ones she'd been told were never filed. "He knew," Sarah whispered. "All along." Among the documents was a handwritten will, last testament of James Hollister, naming the Freeman children as his heirs should he die. Young James Jr. climbed into her lap. "Is Mr. Hollister coming back?" Sarah folded the papers carefully. "I don't know." The day passed with Sarah staring at the documents spread across the kitchen table. Use them only to save her land, or risk everything to expose the entire conspiracy? Her land represented security, safety for her children, the promise she'd made her husband. But something had changed. The world had widened beyond their patch of earth. "They're stealing from everyone," Ella said, examining the papers with keen eyes. "All these families losing land." Marcus paced like a caged wolf. "Hollister stood for us. We should stand for him." Sarah pressed her palms against the rough wood of the table. The grain ran deep, telling stories of growth and struggle, like the lines in her own hands. A knock at the door stilled them all. Sarah motioned the children back, reaching for the rifle. On the porch stood a Chinese man in simple worker's clothes. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held sharp intelligence. "Mrs. Freeman," he said with a slight bow, "I am Li Wei. I worked for Mr. Hollister." Sarah kept the rifle visible. "Why are you here?" "To help, as I have been since Mr. Hollister arrived at your door." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You've been watching us?" Li Wei nodded toward the tree line. "My camp is there. Mr. Hollister would want me to ensure your safety." Inside, Li Wei studied the documents spread on the table. His fingers traced the elegant calligraphy of Hollister's will. "You are not his cook," Sarah said, watching him carefully. Li Wei's smile was slight but genuine. "I am many things. Cook, business associate, friend." His expression sobered. "Mr. Hollister helped my people when others would not. Now he needs help." "They'll kill him," Marcus said, voice tight. "Not immediately." Li Wei pointed to a date on one of the documents. "Judge Clayton hosts a celebration in 3 days. The railroad contracts will be signed. They need Mr. Hollister's signature, willing or forced." Sarah sat heavily in a chair. What can one woman do against all of Salvation Creek's powerful men? Perhaps ask what one woman, 3 children, and a determined Chinese businessman might accomplish together. That night, Sarah dreamed of her husband. He stood at the property line, uniform crisp despite the dust. In his hands, he held the deed to their land. "You've kept our dreams safe," he said. Sarah reached for him. "I'm scared." "Fear and courage share the same bed, love. Always have." She woke with tears on her cheeks and resolve in her heart. The next morning brought planning. Ella reveló su descubrimiento mientras estudiaba los documentos. "These numbers don't match," she explained, pointing to banking records. "They've been altering figures for years, not just our taxes." Meanwhile, young James Jr. returned from exploring with news that made Li Wei's eyes widen. "Tunnels under the town," the boy reported proudly. "The Chinese railroad workers built them. They go everywhere, even under the big houses on the hill." Li Wei confirmed the tunnel's existence, escape routes built by his countrymen facing persecution. Knowledge passed silently through generations of workers. "They would provide a way into Clayton's mansion," he said. Unseen. Sarah stared at the map James Jr. had drawn in the dirt. All paths leading to one decision. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we risk everything." Marcus stood straighter, his father's posture in a boy's frame. "We already have nothing." Ella placed her small hand over the documents. "Accept the truth." Sarah looked at her children, at Li Wei, at the silver watch glinting in the firelight. "Then we use the truth as our weapon." 3 days flashed by in careful preparation. Li Wei taught Sarah to move like a shadow through the mansion based on James Jr.'s tunnel map. Marcus practiced creating distractions with controlled fires at strategic points. Ella memorized banking figures, ready to identify the falsified documents. Sarah sewed a hidden pocket into her skirt for the papers. Li Wei procured a server's uniform that would render her nearly invisible among the party staff. "People see what they expect," he explained. "A black woman serving drinks is beneath notice to men like Clayton." The night of the celebration arrived with a sky full of stars, cold and distant as justice in the Wyoming territory. Sarah kissed each child before departing. "If I don't return by morning, take the papers to Attorney Hammond in Cheyenne." She followed Li Wei through darkness to a tunnel entrance behind the old laundry. The passage was narrow, smelling of earth and old secrets. They emerged in the mansion's wine cellar, the sounds of the party filtering down from above. "Find Mr. Hollister," Li Wei whispered. "I will create opportunity for your escape." Sarah moved through the crowded kitchen, head down, tray in hand. White servants barely glanced at her. She was furniture, background, invisible. She served drinks to men in fine suits discussing profits and progress. Their words confirmed everything in Hollister's documents. Land seized through forged papers. Families displaced for personal gain. A conspiracy wider than she'd imagined. On the third circuit through the mansion's rooms, Sarah spotted a guarded door. She waited until the guard accepted a drink from another server, then slipped past while his attention wavered. The study beyond was dark except for moonlight through tall windows. A figure sat slumped in a chair. Hollister, face bruised, one eye swollen shut, hands bound to the armrests. Sarah rushed to him, setting down her tray. "Mr. Hollister." His good eye widened. "Sarah? You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." She worked at his bonds with a small knife. "Clayton will kill us both," Hollister warned, voice raw. "Then we'd better hurry." As the ropes fell away, voices approached from the hallway. Sarah and Hollister froze, listening. "After the contracts are signed tomorrow," Clayton was saying, "Hollister will have a tragic accident. Overcome with guilt over financial ruin, he takes his own life." "And his holdings?" another voice asked. "Divided as agreed. The Freeman property goes to me personally, prime location." Sarah and Hollister exchanged glances. No time to escape. Hollister fumbled in his pocket, producing a folded document and pencil. With shaking hands, he scrawled across the bottom. "Take this." He pressed it into her hands. "It transfers half my holdings to you, legally binding." Sarah stared at the document. Half of the Hollister Empire, signed over to her name. The door handle turned. Hollister grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a bookcase. It swung outward, revealing another of the Chinese tunnels. Too late. The door opened. Clayton stood silhouetted against hallway light, other men behind him. "Well," Clayton drawled, seeing Sarah. "What have we here?" In the chaos that followed, something knocked over an oil lamp. Flames leapt across expensive curtains. Smoke filled the room. Sarah clutched the signed document as men shouted for water. Hollister pushed her toward the tunnel entrance. "Run," he ordered. "Get the children." But Clayton's men blocked their path. Fire spread rapidly across dry timbers. The mansion's elegant bones became its funeral pyre, and so they found themselves where our story began. Flames licking mansion walls. Sarah herding her children through narrow passages after Li Wei had brought them through the tunnels to help. Smoke clawing at their lungs. Marcus hit by a stray bullet. Sarah clutching a burning deed while facing down Judge Clayton. Hollister at her side, wounded but determined. "You'll never own what was never yours to take," Sarah declared, pushing her children toward safety as the mansion burned around them. The tunnels swallowed them whole. Darkness pressed against their skin as they fled the burning mansion. Marcus leaned heavily on Hollister, blood seeping through improvised bandages. Ella guided young James Jr. with firm hands on his shoulders. Li Wei led them forward, his knowledge of the underground passages their only hope. Behind them, Clayton's men searched with torches and curses. Sarah clutched the silver watch in her palm. The deed was ash, but the evidence inside the timepiece remained intact. "This way," Li Wei whispered, turning down a narrow passage. They emerged behind the livery stable. Night air swept clean their lungs of smoke and fear. Stars pressed down from above, cold witnesses to their flight. Li Wei helped them onto waiting horses. "The old mining cabin," he instructed. 3 miles north. They won't look there tonight with the mansion burning." Sarah mounted behind Ella, arms encircling her daughter. The horses moved like ghosts through the darkness. Marcus rode double with Hollister, face tight with pain but no sound escaping his lips. The mining cabin stood abandoned among pine trees. They dismounted in silence, exhaustion settling into their bones. Inside, Li Wei lit a single lantern. Its glow caught the haggard lines of Hollister's face, the blood on Marcus's sleeve, the soot staining Sarah's skin. "How did you know where to find us?" Sarah asked as she tended Marcus's wound. "I didn't come alone," Hollister replied, glancing toward Li Wei. The Chinese man nodded. "I brought the children through the tunnels after you didn't return. Mr. Hollister and I have been partners for many years." "Partners?" Sarah's hands stilled on the bandage. "Business associates," Hollister clarified. "Li Wei manages my investments in the Western Territories." Sarah finished binding Marcus's arm, her movements precise despite her confusion. "You trust him with your empire, but let him pose as your cook?" "People see what they expect," Li Wei said, echoing his earlier words. "A Chinese businessman is impossible for men like Clayton to imagine." Dawn approached with pale fingers of light through unwashed windows. Sarah settled the children in the cabin's single bed, smoothing hair from foreheads, murmuring assurances. When she returned to the main room, Hollister stood by the door. His injuries had been tended, but weariness hung on him like an ill-fitting coat. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, voice low to avoid waking the children. Outside, they sat on rough-hewn steps. Pine needles stirred with each breath of wind. Mountains rose in the distance, ancient and unmoved by human struggles. "I knew your husband," Hollister began. Sarah's spine straightened. "James was a Buffalo soldier. You were a cattle baron." "Before that?" Hollister's gaze fixed on the horizon. "During the war, we fought in the same battle at Jenkins Ferry. Different regiments, different sides of the field." Sarah's fingers tightened on the step. "My husband never spoke of that battle." "Few men would." Something haunted moved behind Hollister's eyes. It was April. Rain turned the ground to soup. Men sank to their knees in mud and blood. He told her of artillery fire, of confusion in the downpour, of finding himself wounded, separated from his unit, surrounded by Union soldiers. A black soldier found me. Could have left me to die. Should have. Hollister's voice roughened. Instead, he carried me to a medic. Never said a word, just nodded and walked away. Sarah felt her heart constrict. James? I saw his name on his uniform. Freeman. Never forgot it. Hollister looked directly at her now. When the war ended, I tried to find him, to repay the debt, but he'd moved west with his regiment. He never told me. Some debts weigh too heavy for words. Hollister reached for her hand. When I heard about a Buffalo soldier named Freeman who'd died protecting settlers, I knew. I've been looking for his family ever since. Sarah pulled her hand away. So this was charity? Obligation? At first. Hollister's gaze held steady. Now it's something else entirely. The railroad signing ceremony was scheduled for noon at the county courthouse. Despite the mansion fire, Judge Clayton insisted the event proceed. Too much money was invested. Too many powerful men assembled. Sarah, Hollister, and Lee Way arrived as the territorial governor finished his opening remarks. They wore clothes borrowed from the mining cabin's storage trunks. Behind them walked 3 federal marshals, summoned from Cheyenne by Lee Way's telegraph the previous night. Their entrance silenced the crowded room. Clayton's face drained of color. This is a private ceremony. Nothing involving public lands is private, Hollister responded, voice carrying to every corner. The governor recognized Hollister with surprise. Mr. Hollister, we were told you were indisposed. Kidnapped, Hollister corrected, by Judge Clayton and his conspirators. Clayton moved toward the doors. This is absurd. Arrest these people for trespassing. The federal marshals stepped forward, blocking his exit. The lead marshal unfolded papers Sarah had provided. Judge Artemis Clayton, you're under arrest for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Chaos erupted. Men lunged for exits. Documents scattered across polished tables. The governor demanded explanations. Sarah stood unmoved in the center. Her children's future hung in the balance of this moment. One by one, the conspirators were identified. The banker who falsified records, the sheriff who enforced fraudulent claims, the businessmen who profited from others' misfortune. These records prove systematic corruption, the marshal announced, holding up copies of Hollister's documents. Multiple families lost land through forged tax claims. Clayton's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, Hollister. A cattle baron siding with a colored woman over his own kind. I'm siding with justice, Hollister replied. Something you wouldn't recognize if it wore a sign. The marshals led Clayton away in irons. The governor ordered all railroad contracts suspended pending investigation. Outside the courthouse, other families gathered. People who had lost land, homes, livelihoods. Sarah recognized faces from town, neighbors who had turned away when she passed. Now they looked at her with something new in their eyes. Respect. 6 months passed like water over stone. Gradual change, constant motion. The Freeman cabin expanded with a new room built by Marcus's increasingly skilled hands. Hollister provided materials, Marcus provided labor. Equal partnership. Clayton and his conspirators awaited trial in Cheyenne. Most would serve time. Some had fled the territory. The railroad adjusted its route, respecting existing property lines. Sarah stood on her porch, watching autumn paint the distant hills gold and crimson. Inside, Ella tutored neighboring children in mathematics. The girl had discovered her calling in education. A rider approached from the south, Hollister. His visits had become regular, his business now managed largely by Lee Way, while he focused on rebuilding his operations along more ethical lines. He dismounted with the ease of a man born to the saddle. In his hands, he carried rolled papers tied with ribbon. Mrs. Freeman, Mr. Hollister. They had moved past first names in public. a concession to propriety in a world still adjusting to their partnership. "The school plans are approved," he said, offering the papers. "Construction begins next week." Sarah unrolled the documents. The territorial governor's seal marked the bottom. The first integrated school in the county would rise on land donated from both Freeman and Hollister properties. "This is really happening," she said, fingers tracing the architectural drawings. "The world changes one bold stroke at a time." 1 year after their escape from the burning mansion, Sarah stood before the newly completed schoolhouse. Children of all backgrounds waited for the doors to open, the first day of classes, her dream made solid in wood and glass. Hollister approached, additional documents in hand. "What's this?" Sarah asked. "Expansion plans." He offered the papers. "The school needs room to grow." Sarah studied the proposal. More classrooms, a library, land for gardens where students could learn agriculture alongside literature. "Why do you continue giving?" she asked. "Your debt was paid long ago." Hollister began a carefully prepared speech about purpose and legacy, words he'd rehearsed on the ride over, sentiments too long confined to silence. Sarah stepped forward, cutting off his words with a kiss, brief but unmistakable in its meaning. When they parted, a smile softened her face, the first he'd seen untouched by worry or grief. "Some debts can never be repaid," she said, "and some don't need to be." And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It helps motivate me write each story. See you tomorrow.